This is Process and Reality, the only officially unofficial guide to reading Alfred North Whitehead. I'm your host, Tyler Davis. Welcome to the show. Alright, so here we are again with section 4. We're on page 9. The field of special science is confined to one genus of facts, in the sense that no statements are made respecting facts which lie outside that genus. The very circumstance that a science has naturally arisen concerning a set of facts secures that facts of that type have definite relations among themselves, which are obvious to all mankind. The common obviousness of things arises when their explicit apprehension carries immediate importance for purposes of survival or of enjoyment, that is to say, for purposes of being and of well-being. Elements in human experience, singled out in this way, are those elements concerning which language is copious and, within its limits, precise. The special sciences, therefore, deal with topics which lie open to easy inspection and are readily expressed by words. The study of philosophy is a voyage towards the larger generalities. For this reason, in the infancy of science, when the main stress lay in the discovery of the most general ideas usefully applicable to the subject matter in question, philosophy was not sharply distinguished from science. To this day, a new science with any substantial novelty in its notions is considered to be, in some way, peculiarly philosophical. In their later stages, apart from occasional disturbances, most sciences accept without question the general notions in terms of which they develop. The main stress is laid on the adjustment and the direct verification of more special statements. In such periods, scientists repudiate philosophy. Newton, justly satisfied with his physical principles, disclaimed metaphysics. The fate of Newtonian physics warns us that there is a development in scientific first principles and that their original forms can only be saved by interpretations of meaning and the limitations of their field of application, interpretations and limitations unsuspected during the first period of successful employment. One chapter in the history of culture is concerned with the growth of generalities. In such a chapter, it is seen that the older generalities, like the older hills, are worn down and diminished in height surpassed by younger rivals. Thus, one aim of philosophy is to challenge the half-truths constituting the scientific first principles. The systematization of knowledge cannot be conducted in watertight compartments. All general truths condition each other, and the limits of their application cannot be adequately defined apart from their correlation by yet wider generalities. The criticism of principles must chiefly take the form of determining the proper meanings to be assigned to the fundamental notions of the various sciences, when these notions are considered in respect to their status relatively to each other. The determination of this status requires a generality transcending any special subject matter. If we may trust the Pythagorean tradition, the rise of European philosophy was largely promoted by the development of mathematics into a science of abstract generality. But in its subsequent development, the method of philosophy has also been vitiated by the example of mathematics. The primary method of mathematics is deduction. The primary method of philosophy is descriptive generalization. Under the influence of mathematics, deduction has been foisted upon philosophy as its standard method, instead of taking its true place as an essential auxiliary mode of verification whereby to test the scope of generalities. This misapprehension of philosophic method has veiled the very considerable success of philosophy in providing generic notions which add lucidity to our apprehension of the facts of experience. The depositions of Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, Kant, Hegel merely mean that ideas which these men introduced into the philosophic tradition must be construed with limitations, adaptations, and inversions, either unknown to them or even explicitly repudiated by them. A new idea introduces a new alternative, and we are not less indebted to a thinker when we adopt the alternative which he discarded, or she. Philosophy never reverts to its old position after the shock of a great philosopher. So, starting at the beginning again there of the section, the special sciences are restricted to one genus or class. A good word for that would be class of facts, in that when you are operating inside these restrictions, you don't make any statements about facts that lie outside of that class. So, for example, if you're a physicist, you generally don't give your 2 cents about psychology unless you are also educated in and operating out of that realm of facts. The fact that a scientific discipline develops around a set of facts confirms that facts from that set of facts have definite relationships among themselves, which are obvious to just about everyone. We apprehend things or reality and their importance for the purpose of survival or enjoyment, which he calls the being and well-being, manifests these things or this reality as obvious. We can single out elements in human experience. The creation of divisions of scientific disciplines is a kind of singling out. Elements of human experience that make up these common classes are elements that we have a lot of language for that also is precise. The special sciences deal with these elements, topics that lie open to easy inspection, that we can aptly express in words. In other words, some disciplines developed first because they were the easiest and most obvious and publicly available and observable. The study of philosophy, on the other hand, and by contrast, is a voyage towards larger general principles. For this reason, in the infant stage of a science, or of science in general, philosophy is not sharply distinguished from science, historically. This is when we were discovering the most general principles for the subject matter in question for the various disciplines. And to this day, people in general find any new discipline that is relatively novel to be peculiarly philosophical. However, after they develop for a little while, the people who are within the division of science in question accept the general foundational principles of the division of science without any question. So, for example, in the division of study that I graduated in, the division of communications, especially as a theoretical discipline, it's relatively new and it's hotly debated as to whether it belongs in the social sciences or the liberal arts. But even after divisions are established, scientists repudiate the philosophy. For example of this, consider that Newton, after being satisfied with physical principles, developing the language for calculus, rejected metaphysics as a field of study. The fate of Newtonian physics, in light of the theory of relativity, should warn us that there are advances made in our articulation of scientific first principles. The original form of these principles can only be saved by interpreting them with nuance and limiting what they apply to. These new interpretations and limitations usually are unknown in the first phase of development in these disciplines. One phase of development is concerned with articulating general principles, and in that phase, the newer principles wear down the older general principles, limiting them and placing them in a more appropriate context. So because of this, one of the aims of philosophy is to challenge the half-truths, which make up the first principles that are the basis for scientific disciplines. We can't systematize knowledge in watertight compartments. All general truths condition each other, and we cannot adequately define the limits of their application except by connecting them to even wider general principles. We have to criticize general principles primarily by determining the proper meanings for the fundamental notions, for example, the foundational assumptions of the sciences. We have to criticize these while considering them in their relative position to the other foundational assumptions. For us to be able to carry out this criticism, we need a general principle which transcends all subject matters. Now, according to the Pythagorean tradition, European philosophy came from math developing into a science of abstract general principles. But as philosophy continued to develop, philosophy has been energized, perhaps to its own detriment, by the example of math. The primary method of math is deduction, and the primary method of philosophy is descriptive generalization or induction. That is the point that we conclude with, and we move to the next point of Whitehead's talk is this kind of concluding point. He uses this as a bridge here. The primary method of philosophy is descriptive generalization or induction. Now, under the influence of math, people have forced deduction onto philosophy as if it should be philosophy's standard method of operation. But instead, deduction should be an essential, however secondary, method of verification for testing the scope of general principles. Misapplying the tool of deduction to philosophy actually veils philosophy's great successes. It obscures their successes as if they don't measure up to the success of math. Specifically, its success in providing us with generic ideas that shed light on our own experiences, something which math isn't necessarily equipped to do. The fact that we've judged and deconstructed the ideas of various philosophers throughout the ages means that the ideas they introduced into the tradition need to be limited, adapted, or inverted in ways that would be unknown to them and even probably rejected by them. When a philosopher articulates a new idea, they introduce a new alternative idea. For example, when you articulate a hypothesis, you also articulate an alternative hypothesis. As we progress, we introduce possibility even when we are wrong. We're not less indebted to a thinker when we adopt the hypothesis they rejected. Philosophy still never reverts back to its older positions after a new great philosopher breaks the mold. In other words, just don't worry about disrespecting old philosophers by disagreeing with them as an outcome to your ideas. We're still going to be better off for having them in our tradition. That's all we have for today. Join me next time for Section 5, Episode 8.